Hello. Boy, oh boy, what a hassle this is sometimes. Oh my goodness, I can't hardly stand it. Anyway, let me see if I can get this intro to work that I had just made. So let's see. Here we go. Okay, well, that was most of it anyhow. So, yeah, I had to reboot my laptop and reboot a bunch of different things individually. And finally, I was able to get the chat to show up. So, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that you came. I hope you have a wonderful drink. Mine is peppermint tea today, and I feel like I need a little bit stronger something in this cup. But anyway, well, hi, Linda. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. Thank you. You'll have to let me know what you think of that intro. That was kind of fun to put that together. And I was so excited to realize that I could share my screen now. So that was good. Okay, so today we are talking about the generational effects that your parents' generation actually had on your personality, which is super fascinating. There are a lot of different things that work on your personality and determine how you express yourself, including the way that you choose to express yourself, by the way. So today what we're going to talk about is the influence that the time in history had on your parents so that their culture had an effect on how they reared you and what it did to your personality. So I thought that that was a pretty fascinating subject because I was born when my mom was 39. So that's a little bit unusual. I guess it's not as unusual now, but my sister was born when my mom was 47. And so that means that for my sister, her parents were not only a good deal older, and they could have been her grandparents easily, but they also were in a different, like, total historical generation than my sister's peers were. So that made her an odd duck in the middle of her own generation. So that's what we were going to be talking about today. And we will have to talk about birth order next week and the effects that that has on it. Then we can also, well, we've talked a little bit already about attachment styles and how that works with the healthiness or not of the attachment that the mother has with the baby, how that affects the baby as the baby is growing up. And of course, there's always the genetic component. But today, I wanted to show you something kind of cool. Let's see if I can get this to show pretty easily. I think I can, especially since I was able to get it to work just a moment ago. That was nice. This is the generation timeline that we're going to be talking about. So you can see this part here, the coming of age and retirement. I did not have enough time to try to figure that out. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by some of that, but do you see? Actually, when I do that, it makes here we are, baby boomers and the silent generation. So it's an interactive. That's fun. Okay, we'll start down here, the lost generation. So you see how, let me take a step back and say that it depends on who you're talking to, the parameters for each generation. And it could vary wildly by like 15, 20 years worth of a difference. So we're just going to go ahead with what Wikipedia is saying here, and they have great resources. I was kind of looking into it. We're going to go with theirs because they have theirs stacked nice and neat. But just know that these generations might, according to other resources, have different years that they were born, just so you know. But the lost generation, you can see those are folks that were born up to 1900. So that would be my parents' parents. my grandparents, obviously. And then next came the greatest generation, or the GI generation. And I know my face is over top of that, but the years that they were born are 1901 and 1927. So there's probably not there may still be some of the greatest generation around. Okay. This silent generation here, I think it's interesting that they gave them the color gray, and not an outstanding gray, just a a very light medium gray. So, and they're called the silent generation. Okay, so from 1928 to 1945, who do you know that was born in those years? See if you can think of someone. My mom and my dad both were born in the silent generation, and that was so telling when I realized that. Okay, here's baby boomers. Some of my brothers are actually baby boomers. Actually, all of my brothers, all four of them, are baby boomers. They were born in 1946 to 1964. So my sister and I belong in Gen X. You see lots of memes out there. Well, maybe, with Facebook, they know exactly the people that they are sending what ads to. The ads are specified to the particular Facebook profile. But I see lots and lots of Gen X type memes and reels, and it's just really funny stuff. So, all right, here we go. Millennials. This is what started the entire process for me. I actually am doing a little, like a micro study on millennials for my doctorate. And it's pretty interesting, the drastic difference that there is in the workplace between millennials, who, as you can see, were born in 1981 and 1996. That is just one of my kids, actually my oldest one. But yeah, very interesting. Maybe I can gloss over that next week. And then Gen Z, that's my two younger kids, both of my daughters, 1997 to 2012. 2012, you see how long that span is. It's 15 years. So in 2012, that's when my oldest graduated high school. So it jumps. It feels like it jumps a whole lot. Okay, then the next one is Gen Alpha, and they were born in 2013 to the mid-2020s. There actually already is on Wikipedia, they say Gen Beta, and that is for anyone who is born this year and forward. But it's very difficult to identify anything that is going to be affecting that particular generation, because we don't know what's going to happen during their lifetime. And it is the events that happen culturally that have a great deal of effect. So I lost my cursor there. Okay. Give me a second. Newbie here. Okay, so I'm back, obviously. Let's start talking about the silent generation. You may remember that those are the folks that were born in 1929 to 1945. So that's my parents. I guess I could go ahead and share this screen too, because this is a Wikipedia page, and we all know that we're not supposed to use those for research papers, but they do have many, many, many links to their resources. So you always have the opportunity to do that. And I will put the links for the Wikipedia pages in the chat as soon as we are done. So here is about the silent generation. Okay. I'm going to span this in just a little bit. And you see how they have the social generations, and you see that of the Western world. So that matters. Okay. The silent generation, my parents, I could not believe. I thought that this had everything to do with, I thought the way my parents were had everything to do with the way that they were reared in their own personalities, but this lays them out very clearly. Okay, so let's look. They were preceding the baby boomers, obviously. They actually had a couple of four baby boomers themselves. But so the Great Depression affected them, as you can see here. And then World War II was also a big impact on them, of course. And while they were growing up, they also had the Korean War. Lots of war, lots of national pride, all that wonderful stuff. So, and you want to see here, however, they have been noted as forming the leadership of the civil rights movement and the 1960s counterculture, creating the rock and roll music of the 50s and 60s. So that's kind of fun. My parents were absolutely not anybody to go against the tide. So let's look here. In the UK, now that is the Western world, but obviously it's not the United States where we are. The silent generation was also born during a period of relatively low birth rates for similar reasons to the United States. And it was quite traditional upon coming of age. Okay, so when a person became 18, it was a very traditional lifestyle. All right, so down and characteristics, we're going to look UK. As you can see, if you look up these links later, you'll be able to find out a whole bunch. As children and adolescents, they, the silent generation were of the Great Depression, like we said, whose parents, their parents were part of the Roaring 20s. And I thought that was really interesting. If you think about it, somebody who is having their children, you can see that picture that popped up there, to go from the Roaring 20s to having kids who are so compliant and quiet. Very different, very, very different. So now they faced great economic hardship and struggled to provide for their families, right? So they saw the fall of Nazism. Can you imagine being around and being able to listen to the radio about everything that is happening in the war? How devastating that must have been to a childhood. So it changed them drastically. Okay, so they saw a new enemy in communism. So that was something that was new for them. For us, it's something that was pretty much in the past, harder to keep up with, but yeah. And this was kind of cool, the development of the transatlantic flight. So as you can see, our previous president, Joe Biden, was part of the silent generation. So silent generation people here, if you see this, they tended to be thrifty and even miserly, preferring to maximize a product's lifespan and get their money's worth. How many times do you hear that nowadays? Nobody talks about getting their money's worth. I mean, I certainly do. I want to get as much as I can out of each one of my products. I don't like losing things, but I'd rather keep a hold of what I have so that I don't need to be wasteful, as it says here. There were many times, a common phrase when I was growing up was, and from this silent generation was, you don't want to waste your money. And that's something we never hear now. So as you see, silents tended to marry and have children young. Whoop, sorry about that. Yeah. As young parents, the older members of this generation, which would have been my parents, they were born in 29 and 32. They primarily produced later baby boomers, which means, well, two of my brothers anyway. While the younger members gave of the generation and older members, blah, 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 they gave birth to Generation X. And like I said, that's me. I'm a Gen X. So divorce was abhorrent before the silent generation, but it started becoming less stigmatized. Wonder how much of this is making sense to you. If you, of course, that makes sense. I'm just wondering if any of this resonates with you, because I thought this was pretty interesting. This here, as a birth cohort, silence never rose in protest as a unified political entity. Never. Never. They were widely seen as following the rules and benefiting from stable wealth creation. Does anybody recognize these people? Their boomer and Gen X children would become estranged from them due to their differing views regarding social issues of the day. So that was really interesting. Okay. So this is saying how many people, according to the Pew Research Center, how many people are living from these different generations. So, okay, well, we did a little bit of a gloss over of them, and then we can talk next about the greatest generation who was next. Let's see, right? No. Yeah, the greatest generation was before them. Not sure why it's in that particular order, but let's see. Talk about the baby boomers, okay? The baby boomers, they are definitely a different breed than the silent generation. Let's see. Etymology. Okay, well, we know why they were. All right. I actually did go through these before, but I think I was kind of frazzled by having so many troubles with technology earlier that I lost my train of thought about these things. So we're just going to go on to North America and the United States, that kind of thing, and see what they have to say about it. A big deal about them is that when the GIs came back from World War II, there was, of course, lots and lots of babies were made. And so the boom in the economy, people could start affording babies more. So they started having a lot more children. So here we are with the standards of living when baby boomers were born. After the Second World War, the United States offered massive financial assistance to the Western European nations. So the United States was still seen as a major provider in the world. All right, so the automobile obviously was already a common thing here in the United States when the baby boomers came around. My parents, they had a 1957 red Chevy, which was pretty amazing. My oldest brothers are born in 57. But here they're talking about the automobile was already common in North America, so it became common in Western Europe. So that was that long ago. Oh, and some of the items you see there at the top that were deemed luxurious, like the laundry machine, as they called it. It wasn't just a washer and a dryer. This was the laundry machine. So they're very different. Well, did the same task, but it was a lot harder to operate. And then the dishwasher, the refrigerator, the telephone, all of that. The average person could finally live like the upper class of the previous generation. So that's very fun. That's what it was like when my brothers were born. So you see this, isn't this a cute little kid? Over here on the left, you see the picture of their house and all that wonderful stuff. The demand for housing exploded in this particular time frame. This is a big part. That fact there is a big part of the financial coach training that I had received. Sometime we're going to have to get into that. And this is important too. Public health improved with vaccination programs. So in the UK, the introduction of vaccine against polio and measles and pertussis, which is whooping cough, that came about in the 50s and 60s. So the infection rates began to plummet. Now let's think about how important that was for a second. If you went through World War I, had a little bit of a break, World War II, then the Korean War, everybody started coming home, and then health started improving too. So when the baby boomers were coming on the scene, this was a major shift in the overall health of the culture in so many different ways for these different reasons. Okay, so let's just go down and see what their education was like. Remember that probably back before the silent generation, like the lost generation, where they were born before 1900 or including the year of 1900, literacy was not nearly as profound as it is now. So this is why this education section here is really important. The universal literacy. And they even started doing IQ scores, as you can see there. So that was pretty cool. And after, let's see, I'm just scanning through here really quick. All right, so the popular culture, look at that, the arrival of the television set. If you have seen Back to the Future, when he goes back in time, and the family had just gotten their very first television set, and he says, well, the little kid from that family says, "Well, do you have one?" And he says, "Well, of course we have two." And then the little kid was like, "Oh, really? Nobody has two." It's just funny. So soap operas became part of the culture. Think about how these things affected the way that people lived. The baby boomers knew freedom and health. They don't know war. So they're not terrified from the get-go. But the silent generation were definitely very much restricted by the war and the depression and all these terrible things that they had to endure as little tiny ones. So now, what is it like? There are spots in here. My apologies. I'm trying to find protests and riots, by the way. You see that with the 60s and the 70s. I don't know if you have had the opportunity to see that movie, Hidden Figures. They're movies that depict that era, but that was fascinating. It's awfully terrible that the United States went through what they did with the racial injustice and upheaval that happened in the 60s. I don't understand how that happened, but anyhow, here we are. So for the baby boomers, this is what they knew. They knew to stand up to the structured government, to stand up to the squares, all that. So this formed them, right? And they're talking about the German, now the hippies. My brothers had, well, three of my brothers had hair down to their waist for many, many years. They were greatly impacted by that. Okay, well, we're going to stop with that. And then the next ones, as we were talking about, were the Gen X. And that, like I said, was me. These are known as latchkey kids. So as you can see here, as the children in the 70s and 80s, a time of shifting societal values. Remember, in the baby boomers and the silent generation before them, divorce became much more acceptable. So there's more and more people standing up for their rights with the racial movements of the 60s, of the racial rights movements, the civil rights movements of all the different kinds moving up. And then by the time you get to Gen X, what's going on? Well, the parents are so excited and the women are empowered with this newfound, there's freedom, there's lots of the issues of the 50s and 60s have been resolved now. So the moms are no longer the housewives of the 50s and staying at home. So the kids, when they get off the school bus or when they walk home from school, they have a key around their neck that they just use to get into the house. And so they are latchkey kids. So, and music, as you can hear or see there, they were talking about, was a lot of fun during that time. Okay, so you know what? Millennials, we won't even get into them because that is not part of our audience right now. Let's talk about if you have a silent generation parent who has an incredibly strong work ethic and they will not stand up to anyone. They do not believe in social upheaval at all. And I know that particular tab talking about their generation, they were the founders of the civil rights movement and that kind of thing. But they needed the stability in their life, and they wanted to provide that stability for their children because they certainly did not have it as they were growing up. So when I was growing up, I had a rule that my dad said I was not allowed to be out driving past dark. Now, if you think about it, dark in the wintertime can be 4:30 in the afternoon. So as soon as school was done, I needed to be home. That was that. That was very different for them in their generation. Yeah, of course, I was not a latchkey kid, thank God. I'm very grateful that I was not a latchkey kid. But the restrictions that were put on me have a great deal to do with how structured I like for my life to be. I have a tendency to have picked up the same work ethic that my dad especially had. My mom had a good, strong work ethic too. So I pulled that forward, and my sister had that same one too. My older brothers, they're hard workers. They believe in loyalty and all those wonderful things that came from the silent generation. But they were so influenced by the 50s and 60s, especially the 60s, that they were very much into rock and roll and music and all that great stuff. So, what if a millennial was being reared by a silent generation? From what I understand, over in the Far East, it had been common. I'm not sure that it is now, but it had been common for grandparents to be rearing the little ones while the parents went off to work. So that was an interesting concept when it comes to this kind of thing. You know that your parents are just 2 generations prior to you, but the grandparents rearing you, that would definitely enforce quite a different flavor on your rearing and how you're going to want to express your personality as you grow up. So let's see. This is another major impact that was had on generations and what was allowed and what was not. So if you look here, this is on Gen X. Again, my generation, I'm not that old, but the birth control pill that was introduced in 1960 was one contributing factor of declining birth rates, and also goes hand in hand with sexual promiscuity, of course. So that had to do with the bit of fun, we'll call it, that folks were having in the 60s. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? That was the whole thing that they said then. Not funny, but the birth control pill had a great deal to do with the change in the culture back in the 60s. And as you can see how it has affected Gen X, so the declining birth rates. So Gen X is not as prolific in its population as the baby boomers that was just before. So there was a little bit of a curbing. There was control over how many children you were going to have and a little better control. And if you wanted to have kids, if you were married at all, so you could choose, like we were talking about before, not just the dads traditionally going to work, but also the moms finding their careers and feeling empowered within the culture. So the pill, as it became commonly known, reached the younger unmarried college women in the 60s when the state laws were amended and reduced the age of majority from 21 to 18. So another factor, and many of you were around to experience this, another major factor was abortion that was only available in a few states until its legalization in 1973 with Roe v. Wade. That was obviously in the US and in other places. So huge, huge shifts. Now, what is that going to do? If you have a Gen X kid with these cultural things happening, and they have a silent generation parent who wants everything to just stay status quo, silent, let's just work really hard. Let's save all of our money because we remember what the Depression was like. We don't want to, have any of that pulled forward for our kids. And then as the silent generation is having children in the 50s and 60s, they're starting to see the upheaval of the cultural and social unrest. And then these medical advancements, we'll call them, there's the birth control pill, and then abortion became legalized. And so you can imagine why, if I'm born in 1968, why my mother, born in 29, the year that the Great Depression hit, why she would very definitely, she and my dad would clamp down on my lifestyle that I'm able to have and even the education that I got. So let's think about that for a second. Again, I'll run through the silent generation. They experienced World War II, the Great Depression, and all those horrible things. They knew what it was for a great, devastating loss. As they were growing up, they ended up starting their families. Generally, they married generally young, had their kids in the 50s and 60s. Then if they had children later, like my parents did, and they had me in 1968, all that unrest in the 60s, and then birth control pills, and then abortion being allowed. This is why my being born in 68 and the way that I was raised was so different from the way that my brothers who were born in 57 were raised. Back in 57, everything was still happy-go-lucky, right? So they were reared differently, even with the same parents, because of the cultural response. So this 50s were not scary to the silent generation. The end of the 60s ended up being scary, and into the 70s. So you can see how that would change everything about my life compared to my brothers' lives, who are 12 years older than I am. We were awfully close to millennials with my sister. And again, lots of places consider different year spans for the different generations. So some places consider her a millennial, which is interesting. But the millennials obviously follow Gen X. And if my oldest kid, who was born in 94, is considered a millennial, and he was reared by a Gen X who was living in a broad culture that was all powerful, with the big shoulder pads, the big hair, lots of hairspray, and talking about all the freedoms that we have and all the responsibility that we have, the latchkey mentality, where if you're not standing on your own, then too bad for you. You're just not going to be able to live life very well. So my parents, silent generation, to me, to my 1994 son, that's very different than the other millennials out there, if that's making sense. Okay, here we go. You guys may remember, of course, that there was a Great Recession in the 80s when I was in high school. Now, I didn't know about it because I was sheltered from that kind of thing. We just had, my parents saved me from that hassle. Anytime I would ask how much something cost, my parents would pretty much say, well, don't you worry about it. We've got it covered. So you're okay. So there was not a whole lot of education with that. And I had to figure out things on my own. So that was the norm. You see how the generations have affected the way that I was reared. Now, the latchkey section of my generation definitely affected the millennials and the Gen Zs, because we all of a sudden wanted to get very involved in our children's upbringing, all that. Now, they found new freedom, the millennials and the Gen Zs. They found a great deal of freedom in social media, technology, getting much, much bigger than just the stupid little console TV that I had. Now they have all of this freedom, and they have parents who want to take care of them, not necessarily doting on them, but definitely protecting their environment, being the mother hen that they did not get themselves. So that's going to change a lot of things. Now, this is one of the things that I was studying for that very small research that I was doing for my doctorate. And the millennials have generally been considered the look at me generation, unfortunately, because there are lots of reasons why they were told, and here we are, psychology, generation me. They were the millennials in particular. That was when the participation trophies started coming around. So everybody wanted everybody to be included, involved, having a great time, feeling built up, feeling protected. So that changed a lot of what happened to their personalities and what it is that they chose to do with their life. Okay, sorry, I just got a message. So let's look at this. Twinge here, who is the author and a psychologist of that book that's Generation Me, considers millennials, along with younger members of Gen X, to be part of what she calls Generation Me. So there's traits of confidence and tolerance, which are both good, right? Because the Gen X had to figure everything out on their own. So they had what's a good, like they're rough and tumble. We can handle whatever is thrown our way. But for the millennials, they also had a sense of entitlement and narcissism, as you can see there, which is interesting. That is unfortunate, right? Many of the millennials that are getting into, or were, they're a little bit older now, but as they were getting into the workforce, managers were having a hard time trying to figure out, okay, well, how are we going to take care of these new millennial workers? They have this huge idealism. They want to work for companies that have a very deep purpose, and the millennials want to make an impact where they work or in their life. They want to make sure to have an impact. So this is good. That's where the confidence and tolerance comes, but the entitlement and narcissism, that's the problem. So if you see here, there's the William Strauss and Neil Howe. They are researchers that are looking at the common characteristics of the 4 generational archetypes and how they repeat the cycle. So they predicted that millennials would become more minded than the GI generation, which is the greatest generation, the one just before the silent generation, which is right. With a strong sense of community, both local and global. So they ascribed 7 basic traits to the millennials: that they feel like they are special, they're sheltered, they're confident, team-oriented, conventional, pressured, and achieving. Now, I can see that in my children somewhat. I didn't necessarily shelter my kids, but I did homeschool them. That was very important to me, to be able to homeschool them and make sure that they had the education that they needed to do well in the world. So that was interesting to me when I found these things. Does any of this resonate with you? How much did your culture have an impact on you, and how much of it was a different situation than the rest of your cohorts because your parents were of a different generation than most of your peers were? That was an interesting thought. Well, my apologies for having so much technical trouble at the beginning, but I think that is probably enough for us to talk about today. And we will work on birth order and what that has to do with your personality next week. And that should be really, truly fascinating because, oh my goodness, there was so much truth to be had. Definitely when I was studying that before. Absolutely. And of course, I cannot find I want to do the little outgo thingy. Let's see how that works. Thanks for being tolerant of me. Really appreciate it. Okay. Well, remember, you is kind, you is smart, you is important. That's from this Gen X mama to you. You do matter, and I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you watching and just wanting to take your influence that you naturally have and turning it into inspiration. So thank you very, very much. I hope you have a wonderful week, and we will see you next week. Thanks.